I'll just read the questions out first of all, and then if anyone on the can do if anyone wants to take the lead. The first question is: what is the main difference between a communist, a technocracy society, and a resource-based economic society, and why they both really different? Just reading word for word. Does anyone want to take the lead on that?
Can I just see the question? Sure. Okay, so it's communist/technocracy. So by that I assume they mean communism as in Soviet-style totalitarianism or something similar. Not necessarily communism in the sense of being a stateless, classless, moneyless society. In that sense, I would say they're different because in a resource-based economy, to the best of my knowledge, you're dealing with a participatory economy where people are encouraged to give their designs and discuss and collaborate on the production of material to be used in daily life. There's a very good speech, probably Peter Joseph's best speech, which is economic calculation in a natural law resource-based economy, or what he abbreviates as a NLRBE. That would I'd say that's the main difference.
Yeah, actually, we had a Finnish ZDay just last month, and this was the first question that got asked there as well. So, what we answered then, which I could reiterate here, is that even if you take the theoretical communism concept, and then if we understand technocracy as a system where experts make the decisions, and not politicians, but actually scientists and those with the technical knowledge handle the decision making in society, then a resource-based economy differs from that because in a resource-based economy, nobody makes top-down decisions. The decisions are arrived at through the utilization of what is called a collaborative design interface, where you can, as he said, input any ideas, any designs in a very democratic manner, and the computer-aided system will help to evaluate the sustainability goals and etc. of those ideas. So it's not like it's a completely different structure, societal structure. It's not such a power structure where some experts make decisions for people. So that's the main difference, at least to technocracy, that I think.
Mainly, I'd say, communism was really based on cohesion by means of coercion, whereas a natural resource-based economy, it's rather cohesion by means of cooperation. That's all I'd have to say.
Nice.
I would say in its simplest form, and may sound overly simplified, but the way I often put it at information stalls is, if you look at capitalism, it's the means of production owned by the capitalists. Communism, I think generally as we understand it, its broadest sense, is the means of production owned by the proletariat, or anyone other than the capitalists effectively. A resource-based economic model, there is no ownership. It's the creation of an abundance so people have access to it, so the idea of property is something that we can transcend. That's what I would say, and it's probably most oversimplified version.
Yeah, the other two questions are, because there's my point sort of covers all three. So the other two questions are: will a powerful group take over a resource-based economy for their own gain? And the third question is: will identities like nationalism and or religion still exist in a resource-based economy society? I mean, I've kind of got two things to say. First is that, as I said in my talk, we're talking about trying to bring about a complete shift in the collective consciousness, so one away from which we are fragmented and squabbling with each other and competing with each other to make profits, and instead one where we're united, all each doing our own thing, but under the umbrella of all of us, collaborating to try and make the world a better place for everyone, right? So with that shift in consciousness, many of these kinds of questions, in my opinion, become non-questions. Will a powerful group take over RBE for their own gain? Well, no, not if everyone's working, not if everyone's on that page of working together. Do you know what I mean? The other thing I wanted to say temporarily escapes me, so I'll pass on and maybe come back in a minute.
doesn't see the questions. I don't know if I have anything to add, but let's see. Will identities like nationalism or religion still exist in an RBE society? Well, since I talked about science, one might think that I would think that religions are illogical and therefore should not exist in the future. And the same goes for nationalism, which also closely resembles a religion in many cases. But I still think that it depends on people. We were actually discussing this with David the other day, because it gives comfort to people having beliefs, even though they might not be justified rationally or logically. So as long as people need that for comfort, they will figure out a way to have any kind of ideas or beliefs that will help them with those worries. But as the educational system gets better in a natural law resources-based economy, I think it's through education that we will learn how to actually think in a more rational way, not only about the problems we face, but about ourselves, about our place in the universe. And I think that there does frankly exist a kind of conflict between beliefs and then what can actually be confirmed to be true by looking at nature. So they will exist in an RBE society, but maybe to a diminishing degree, and they won't be forced away, that they would just go underground, as Fresco tends to say. It's just education.
Behind one of the questions about will a group of people emerge and take control of this despite the good intentions of the group, it's an observation that throughout history, as Lord Acton, the 19th century parliamentarian, said, power corrupts and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely, that there are weaknesses in our human nature which, despite good intentions, often drive us, especially when we are in positions of greater responsibility, to let the power go to our head. And we're all aware of good politicians or good business leaders who went bad because of their feelings of superiority and feelings of self-importance. So, I mean, the original communists also thought they would be free from such temptations and tendencies, because they thought that people, through the process of the revolution, the workers' struggle, whatever, they would be remade and they would lose their narrow perspectives and they would become a part of a wider consciousness. And it didn't happen, sadly. And the question is, well, what is the roots of our selfish behavior? What is the roots of these insecurities? What is the roots of these bad aspects of our nature? And as I understand it, and I have a great deal of sympathy with this, the TZM view is that many of these weaknesses are an expression of the fact that we are in a destructive environment often. We are bombarded all the time by consumerist messages and other insecurities, and despite our best tendencies, we do sometimes then let that selfishness and vanity come to the surface. So I think the answer to this, in part, is we keep doing what Timo said, it's peer review. That is, we are open to having people giving us constructive feedback, and we ensure that this doesn't happen. After all, when people complain about the dangers of technocracy, that is, having technical people taking decisions on behalf of everybody else, they're afraid that these technocrats will again lose touch with common people, the common feelings, which is again why we need to have this feeling of the systems of peer review and wide collaboration to try and make sure that people don't become too caught up in the self-sense of their own importance, and that we keep each other honest through vigorous processes of hugging each other and being friends.
I think it's also true to say, following on from that, you know, I feel slightly uncomfortable doing this Q&A because I don't really feel like I know a huge amount in terms of solutions and transition from here to there. This is all very, you know, that's the hardest of all the questions. But if you can at least begin to create that set of circumstances I was talking about before, where we're collaborating instead of competing with each other, you know, solutions will come. You've got smart people working hard, trying to figure out solutions to problems. We can't, you know, for any of us to sit here and try and pretend that we have all of the answers to all of the problems, to all of the solutions to all of the problems, would be silly, right? Because, you know, the world is changing at a phenomenal rate. If you unleash the power of human creativity, if you unleash the power of technology on the world in a fair and constructive and collaborative way, solutions will emerge of which we as yet have no conception, you know what I mean? So we can't possibly see from here what the road is going to look like, what the map of the future is going to be. The future is going to be unlike anything we can conceive of right now. The point is to create the circumstances whereby the creativity and the technology can solve the big problems that we have immediately and the problems that are going to come down the road. That's the point. So yeah, we need to really...
Just to follow up on that, and very briefly before we go to the question, I was itching to have the microphone over. If you look for what the structural reinforcements, a system based on competition, well, there is the reinforcement to have a kind of to acquire as much as you can. That's the name of the game, basically. If the system is based on cooperation, that structural reinforcement is removed. So it's kind of from a structural point of view to take it from.
Who had their hand up here? Was it? I thought someone originally... Okay.
When I've had conversations with people about some of the topics that we've discussed, I've had people tell me that I'm sort of too left-wing, or that I'm, I've got my head in the clouds, and that actually things like war drive the development of technology, and that's the reason that they're funded. So things like the internet, things like radar technology, a lot of the technology that we now use in our everyday lives wouldn't exist if it weren't for the fact that we're sort of, as a nation, as a culture, so driven by the idea that we need to sort of have these war technological advancements. And I've been told that actually if we all had a basic living allowance, that actually the price of everything would just go up to accommodate and absorb that, and that actually people would become passive and live on it, and that we wouldn't be creative, or we wouldn't be competitive, or we wouldn't want to necessarily advance. And what would you say in response to that?
Two questions, but it's like, well, I mean, there's an analogy there with art. It doesn't just be... So, for example, you could look at Michelangelo and the buildings that he decorated. Well, decorated, it's not really the right phrase. Adorned, just because very rich men paid for that, to come into being, and were often using it to project their own power, doesn't make his artwork any less beautiful. And just because his artwork's beautiful doesn't make their intentions good. So it's like, I think often people use this criticism against science. They say, oh, look at the nuclear bombs and stuff. How could science possibly be good when scientists are so responsible? Well, actually, that's more of a problem with our political system. Yeah. Did you want to say?
Well, no, that's not really...
No.
That wasn't what I meant.
What are you trying to say?
Things like war do drive technologies, for sure, but it drives technologies in particular directions, right? Where in the absence of war, the assumption is that we would have sat around and not invented anything. We would have simply invented different things, right? If you create a positive, nurturing environment for people to live in, people are going to be creative. It is at the heart of what we are, right? We are creative beings. I mean, I don't want to get too namby-pamby,
What I'm talking about with the funding for it is driven purely by kind of that.
I think I get it.
Yeah.
I think I get it. For example, in space research, which I'm a big fan of, we stopped going to the moon and to the stars because the Cold War ended, and there wasn't this need for governments to support that science anymore, because it was just a means of measuring who's the best. The war against Russia, so to say, and between Russia and America. So it is true that wars have been used as a kind of way to justify us investing into science, and unfortunately, it is a large part of the funding for sciences comes from the government, and the scientists have to justify getting those funds, and a lot of the funding is directed to the needs of the current social paradigm. So I think it's just scientists would do amazing things. They would research whatever. They're really curious people. It's in the nature of science is to be curious about everything, and it's again problem of the socio-economic system, which doesn't have the incentive to invest in life-improving technologies, and that could solve these problems we have. So if we change the social system, we can direct resources to science, and scientists will create. So,
is there a way that people can crowdfund science, for example?
Crowdfunding science.
It's so expensive, isn't it?
It is really expensive. Yeah.
Too expensive for that.
Yeah. Yes.
As I understand the question, the simple answer to the first one would be the reason why it's put into this kind of technology is because war is profitable. That's the simple answer. Financially profitable, that is. What was the original question you asked, sorry, about why?
I just wonder how you would respond. Yeah, there's kind of two.
One is you're a silly utopian, and the other one is that war drives innovation. Yeah?
Drives innovation. Well, that's it.
Then I've got my head in the house to assume that innovation would still be funded if there weren't some profitable.
Well, yeah, there is also the argument to say that this kind of I've lost my train of thought with all that. You go.
So one counterexample is CERN. You know, the countries of the world are cooperating big time to explore the meaning of life through the Higgs particle and supersymmetry and so on, not being driven by war. It's not a conflict. So that is one good example. So if we organise society better, there's so many other things we could do. The current way of organising society is so many of us in bullshit jobs, you know, as has been said. And since that notion came out, the person who wrote the book, David Graeber, on many people are in bullshit jobs. Wherever he goes, wherever he speaks, he gets people coming up to him from the company where he speaks and says, frankly, you know, many of us are in bullshit jobs. So we could organise society rationally so much better so that people could get involved. Other positive example on a lesser scale is the EU Brain Project. You know, there's €1 billion being decided to explore the brain. I think that should be more like 10 billion euros. I think that we should be putting a whole lot more money into that. And it's true, currently we're held up because there's still too much influence over decisions by existing vested industries such as armaments and weaponry and fossil fuels. But with more rational decisions, we could take much more. Then your other question, which is related, it said, well, if we give people a basic income, aren't they just going to be lazy? Aren't they going to lose their will to live and to be creative? I think the evidence is exactly against that. There's a lovely book came out recently called Utopia for Realists by a young Dutch author. I can't quite remember his name. It's something like Rutger Bergman, yes, it's not, and he has lots of evidence he's gathered from experiments in which people were given money, and it gave them comfort, and then they went on and did all kinds of interesting projects in their life. So it's a dismal view of humanity that says if you give, and let's look at young children, you know, young children don't need to work for a living, you know, and what do? They spend all the time in bed? No, they bounce out of bed, not because they're thinking, I've got to earn money, it's because they want to get on with the project, you know. We need to rekindle that aspect of human nature as well, and for the right society we can have wonderful things.
Ask yourself the question, what would I do if money was no object?
Yeah, I mean, how many people don't follow careers in, you know, art, music, drama, whatever, because there's no money, you know, there's no guarantee of a living. So, you know, there's all sorts of creative pursuits which people don't engage in because of money restrictions. If I could just say one more thing, I think there's one element of your question which hasn't been answered yet, and that is what do you respond to people that accuse you of being a silly utopian? Because you're quite right, I get that a lot as well. What I do is I put it right back on them. Well, hang on a minute. If you believe that this is the way it has to be, if you can't even imagine a better, more equitable, fairer world, what chance do we ever have of bringing it into being, right? If you can't even imagine the possibility of it. Put it right back on them, you know?
Can I just make some very quickly? So it could be a semantic game. You know, if people say, "Oh, you're too left-wing," we could say, "Okay, if by left-wing you mean like I'm like a Marxist-Leninist, then yeah, I wouldn't want to be left-wing, you know, personally. But if by left-wing you mean somebody who cares about minorities, is egalitarian, you know, sustains all those principles that the left-wing in the French Revolution really believed in, then yeah, sure, what's wrong with that? You know, they're good values that most people have today. In fact, a lot of conservatives even have those values today. Then, you know, a lot of conservatives want women to have the vote. I mean, the first real feminist was a Tory, you know, Emmeline Pankhurst. It's interesting, people don't remember that, but there's a lot of commonality between left wing and right.
Cool.
Yeah, just one more thing before we move on to other questions. In terms of responding to people saying that you're left-wing, the way I respond to that is I say, well, the left wing and the right wing are still attached to the same vulture. Are those really the only options that we've got to work with? Just left or right, black or white, good or bad? You know, why aren't there other options on the table? You know, it's this restrictive mentality that keeps us. I mean, what was it that I think it was Noam Chomsky or David Icke that said the way to get people thinking in a box is limit the options of debate, so that people start squabbling amongst themselves. But in terms of the motivation for innovation, I think there was one thing that Neil deGrasse Tyson said about mostly we innovated because we didn't want to die. Right? It's like the phrase, necessity is the mother of all invention, right? We invented things because we didn't want certain circumstances and we wanted other circumstances. And if you think about it, in terms of the face of all these ecological problems, that puts into perspective a massive requirement of innovation and a massive requirement to move forward. So considering all these problems, that requires a huge shift forward. So you can say to them, well, you know, that's really what would innovate things, but still you're thinking about things in terms of the left or the right. So that's that.
Thank you very much for your talk. I loved almost every single one of them.
Almost. Now we're just left to wonder.
And actually, so it's not a question that I have for you, actually. It's more a call to action to people in the room. And I'm sure you will forgive me for that. But I've been working in technology and innovation for the last 10 years. And I've learned a great many things. So I've been working for big companies, making them more successful, and products that had millions of people using it. But it didn't really make me happier. And I'd like to leverage my knowledge to really contribute. And you mentioned like baby steps that we need to take to achieve our goal. So I have an idea to propose. So my idea is to create an app or a service in which you can share and swap in your neighborhood. So typically by using tricks from the Silicon Valley that we learned that you use every day on Facebook or Instagram, which is basically people are lazy and they will activate only if it's easy enough. Well, I want to reduce dramatically the barriers of entry towards a sharing economy by having, you probably have something at home that you don't use anymore, and your neighbor perhaps have the needs that you want. So the idea is kind of an Uber for things. Let's say
have you created this app already?
So I conceptualized the UX and I have a piece of code. So my call to action here is that there is so much that I can do on my own. So if there is somebody in the room that could help, in particular, so development, iOS, Android, or web. Obviously also marketing capability. So if you have a means of reaching crowds. And perhaps funding as well. If you guys have too much money, you don't know what to do, it can always help to...
We certainly appreciate that. I mean, the networking, certainly in terms of like a democratized way of people being able to use technology and interlinked with social connections, is definitely worth pursuing. So, you know, if anyone here is in the field of being able to help develop this, go speak to that gentleman.
Thank you very much.
Hi, just again wanted to thank you as well for your time and being with us. It's not so much a question, but more of sharing a bit of information and sort of feeding back what could be done. Where I think everyone's come from a similar antic of theology, politics, economy, science, of the mystery and curiosity of what's going on. And I think everything's brought everyone around to a case where in some case, people believe that there is something wrong in the world, in one way or another, at the very core, you know. And whether you talk about the way you present a presentation and how you've got to be a bit delicate and how you've got to, in a sense, red pill stage by stage, and how you've got to be comfortable and not speak certain language so that it eases the mind into people thinking about this. But when it gets to a case where progress has been going on very well for hundreds of years, and it's a good stage of going 2 steps forward and 1 step back and trying to repeat and trying to repeat. But it's a case where I personally think a lot of good has happened, but a lot of atrocities that have happened in the space of history have stayed the exact same, if not worse. And you could go far out the rabbit hole or back again and cover every topic. That singularity comes back to the same concept and premise. And I feel personally, like in the last year especially, not just throwing in Donald Trump and It's Making America Great Again and the Hill Machine, to Norway's elections, France has just happened, to our own country's goddamn mess, excuse my French. There is something systematically corrupt. And I personally think that everyone likes to throw it out that politics, it's corruption, banking, it's corruption, it's just the way of life, it's just the rule of law. I see the case where man is the greatest monster, and it's man that's doing this. And it's a case of, we all talk about the evil, we all talk about what's really going on, but is anyone legitimately trying to discuss and find out the who, the why, the who, and you know, what the fuck?
That's why we're here.
That's exactly why we're here.
That's why we're in this room right now. That's why every single one of you is here, because we all care about making that change. We all recognise that there's problems in the world. We recognise that, you know, there's only a very small amount of places where the real kinds of encouragement to go, right, well, let's look for solutions instead of problem. You can't do anything about it. You can't. No. You've got to vote. No, if you want to change things, you've got to vote. Right? That seems to be the problem reaction solution. So this is why we're here.
Absolutely. It was just to throw in a case where universal basic income, plutocratic technocracy of a future where we've got a direct democracy as opposed to a representative democracy. It was a case where, from everything from, let's say, the WikiLeaks in the last year that's been dished out, from the Podesta emails showing the true face of what was apparently a democratically elected party, specifically in the Americas. There's been a recent video that came out about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, from a Dutch banker, where everyone discusses about whistleblowing videos and leaks, and it's come to a case where either it is the greatest Hollywood acting, or it is legit, in my personal mind. And I wholeheartedly believe that it is one of the most important videos to share, from just the Zeitgeist Movement to every movement. I think every person should watch it and base their own critical knowledge and thinking and come up with their own opinion about exactly what's going on.
Do you mind just a couple of things? I think you're expressing, I think, certainly anyone that's ever been out on the street trying to talk to people has experienced a sort of sense of hopelessness, that do you know what I mean? That we're just too far gone, and that is entirely understandable. But you can't just give. Do you know what I mean? I kind of don't disagree with you. I sort of feel that the only way any real change is likely to come about is if some kind of major catastrophe befalls us, forcing us to change the way that we interact with each other. Do you know what I mean? Bringing down the existing power structures, forcing us to change and do so. But nevertheless, this is still what I do with every waking minute of my life, despite my belief that it's hopeless, because I can see no higher purpose for one's life. Do you know what I mean? Once you have taken the red pill and you're out, there's no going back, right? So, you know, what else are you going to do? What else are you going to do? If it is all doomed to collapse, and it's all doomed to collapse, and that's going to happen anyway, right? So, well, yeah, or you can just fuck you and run away somewhere. Yeah.
Do something about it, or you just give up.
Or you try to do something about it in the full knowledge that you're, likely futile, but you still try.
So I understand the idea that a catastrophe might change our expectations, but I really hope it doesn't come to that, because catastrophes have a habit of getting out of control. We might think, well, we'll have a little bit of a catastrophe, but then it just goes on. I mean, it's like in the revolutions, every time there was a major revolution. But I hope we can do better. And I want to follow up your thought that maybe it's humans that are the issue. It's not just the banks, it's not just the businesses, it's not just the politicians, it's the fact that it's human. So this ties up to an earlier discussion as well. What makes people behave badly? And one theory is, it's our economic structures, it's our social structures that makes us behave badly. If we fix the economics in the society, then we'll be fine. Another theory is we're all sinful, that's what it is, and all we need to do is to get ourselves reborn and we'll fix it. Another theory, and I think is a serious theory we need to look at, is that we've got various aspects of our human nature from evolutionary times in which it made sense for us to be quite xenophobic, it made sense for us to be quite selfish and short-term thinking, and these things may not change quite so quickly. If we just change society, we might still have these aspects of human nature. So one thing I didn't talk about earlier, but maybe I should have, is the idea of transhumanism, which says not only do we want to transcend the limitations of the structures of society, we want to transcend the limitations of human nature by fixing our human nature, possibly by genetic re-engineering, possibly by understanding what's going on in the brain much better and giving us smart drugs and things to make us more human rather than more selfish. So this is, I think, a very serious thing we'll have to consider, understanding what makes us sometimes selfish despite no reasons to be selfish. Maybe we can fix it by meditation, maybe some of the Buddhist principles apply, but I think I'd like to use science as well to make sure that we are addressing these urges which sometimes come apparently for no reason, and maybe we can fix it by fixing human nature, and then we'll have a better society. I think that's part of the answer. I'm reluctant to have just one answer saying we fix the banks, then everything else will be fixed, or if we fix the individual humans, everything else will be fixed. I think we need to address it on multiple levels, step by step.
I just would like to add two pieces of information before we get the next question. One is that the society we now witness has always been a society based on scarcity, and what we are striving for is a society based on abundance, and scarcity creates a certain kind of behavior when you have to compete to survive. So that has been what has driven the human nature, so to say. There is a great chapter in the Zeitgeist Movement Defined book about human nature, which I suggest for everybody to read. That answers that question thoroughly. If there is a human nature, if there's human nature, it is to adapt. That's what we are as humans. Yeah, we can do whatever we want. It's we adapt to the environment we are in. Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is my first time. I greatly appreciate listening to your voices and what your ideas you're offering. I'd like to bring us down to something very, very fundamental that we could all do tonight. So here's a question for the panel. How many of you run the tap whilst brushing your teeth? You may answer.
I don't.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I remember my teacher told me not to when I was about
So I would
6
like
years
to
old.
offer this idea
with me.
tonight that all of you leave this place, and for no other reason other than it's a good idea, do not run your tap whilst brushing your teeth. I'm sure you all know the good reason behind it.
Just to
One step further and turn the shower off while you're soaking yourself.
Yeah. It kind of comes from the idea of sustainability. If you really internalize the sustainable worldview, then many of these ecological choices come from that. That's why many in the movement are also vegetarian, which is one of the biggest things I think you can do. So it just comes from the idea of sustainability. Yeah.
What with all our institutions being corrupted and so on at the moment, or not being properly managed, wouldn't it be easier to, let's say, infiltrate and help them adapt faster?
My own view is that real, lasting, proper, positive change is not going to come about like that. Real, lasting, positive change, if it's going to come about peacefully and sustainably, is going to come about from the ground up. It's not going to come from the top down. So we're going to have to turn away from, we're going to have to form our own society independent of the ruling apparatus that currently exists, and start growing our own food, purifying our own water, educating our own children, generating our own power, turning away from the apparatus that currently feeds us everything and tells us where to go, what to think, what to wear, who to hang out with, what to eat, what to like. Do you know what I mean? All of this, if we're going to bring about peaceful, lasting change, we have to do it. And it's not going to be the bottom 3 or 4 billion there living hand to mouth. It's not going to be the top couple of 100 million. It's us, the middle and working class people in rich countries. It is up to us to change the world. No one else is going to do it.
Yes, it is up to us, and I don't mean just going into politics and so on. I mean infiltrating, let's say, the school boards. Every institution out there, every institution out there, and helping them adapt. Wouldn't they benefit with us, with them, to help them? Not just on the outside where we can have a harder time and have difficulty in explaining to them from outside.
You mean like utilising the best of what an institution or a corporation or whatever has for the benefit of what we're looking to achieve?
Yeah, because we're not going to be able to go straight away into a resource economy in a snap. So we're going to have to adapt somehow, and it's going to be slow. And we're all going to have to teach our children and our children's children, because it's not probably going to happen within a generation.
Agreed, yeah. This is why I think the idea of, from a transitional point of view, as a step or a process, things like unconditional or universal basic income are so good. As for an exact answer to your question, how we might go about that, I don't know if there is one way, but ideas such as unconditional basic income, I personally like to champion quite a lot, because they do encompass this idea of, okay, well, how can we take what we've got and transition or point us in a different direction out of the mess that we're in? That might be a way to do it. Something along those lines is what I would suggest. Economic evolution, I think it was Peter Joseph who said in a Facebook post a little while ago, economic revolution is priority number one. So along those lines.
There's a really nice sort of slogan from the anarchist movement, and particularly the anarchist union, the Wobblies in the United States, who say we need to build a new society in the shell of the old. And it's not to say just stop what we're doing right now and then keep doing something else, because obviously that's impossible. It's to say to build a new society in the shell of the old. It's to expand the floor of the cage, to use the other metaphor I mentioned. Sometimes these ideas are so complex and abstract that a nice image captures them quickly and more efficiently. There's also, I'll just quickly mention, there's a lovely quote about Saul Alinsky, who was that community organizer I mentioned, kind of like the grandfather of community organizing, who said that before we get rid of the two-legged rats, we've got to get rid of the four-legged rats. And he was using that in reference to helping very poor apartment blocks in Chicago and New York, the residents, to get together and deal with their problems one at a time. So first, the basics, and then it's like baby steps, and then up towards attacking big figures like the billionaires, in this case, could be.
Hello, good afternoon. I did love to see you all. Just a little bit sad that there's no ladies there. No, but this, well, you did cross mine. Yeah, no, but the question is, so, it's a bit of a difficult topic. It's been said that the biggest threat to humanity, apart from climate change, is the automation, sorry, my accent, of jobs, okay? So whether it is the guy working, at Tesco's that is going to have no job because, the machines are taking over, to the doctor, because robots can perform open heart surgeries. So very soon there's going to be no jobs for people. Now, I know for the resource-based society, this is the ideal. This is what we want, right? A society where we don't need to work. This is amazing, of course. However, let's be honest here. We talk about 7 billion people in the world. How do you guys feel about it? How do you guys feel about knowing that actually very soon, there's not going to be jobs as we know it today? And even though it would be very good for us and for our goal, our common goal here, being honest and being practical, how do you guys feel about it? Is that a curse, or is that, a blessing in disguise?
Sure. Two things. First of all, the reason we don't have any female speakers here is because everyone that is speaking today are the only people that applied to speak. That is the reason for it. That's it. As I've mentioned, the simple answer to that is the ideas such as unconditional basic income as ways to point us in a different direction, to put us on a different trajectory. You're right, your jobs will disappear, and as David pointed out, David Graeber coined the term, I think he coined the term, didn't he? Bullshit jobs. Yeah. How many of the jobs, honestly, in this room, who thinks their job is relevant or completely necessary for survival on this planet? Okay. Yeah, fair enough.
Even before David Graeber, Bertrand Russell used to write about, there's two kinds of jobs in this world. There's moving matter, and so, it's farming, building, roads, that kind of stuff. And then there's supervising those who are moving matter, right? And that's it. Those are the only two kinds of jobs there are in this world. So, it's very, very, very simple. If you can automate all the jobs that require the moving of matter, you no longer require anyone to supervise those jobs. The tasks are being accomplished. People no longer need to work. I mean, it is that simple, right? As soon as you manage to get this poisonous, evil profit motive out of everything, as soon as you can take that out of the human consciousness, and I know I'm making it sound like, it's only one little thing. I know it's a big deal. I get that. But if you can remove that from the human consciousness, do you know what? Everything else falls into place just like that.
Cheers. We actually had a feminist giving a speech in our ZDay Finland because of this very issue, because I noticed that there's just too few women involved in our activism, and I was wondering why that is, and we wanted to get somebody from the outside who has actual knowledge about how to solve that. And she said that, which resonated with me, was that actually women do a lot of unrecognized volunteer work. And they do volunteer work that just caring for others. They're like the mother of everyone around them, basically. So if I had to do that, I wouldn't have time to contribute. And I think that's one of the reasons why we see less women in activism, unfortunately. I would definitely encourage anyone here to come and actually do this, be an example, and inspire others as well. Yeah, thanks.
It's funny, I was just about to talk about In Praise of Idleness by Bertrand Russell, and I was just about to mention this work, what's called reproductive labor often, right? Work like looking after elderly relatives, looking after children. I'll very just quickly say that I think that if I had a basic income, I know I would still do work. I would still probably do more activism, probably engage in more artistic pursuits. I think most people know that this is the kind of thing they would do. And in fact, it's kind of, if you think about social movement, you could think about a two-stage picture of social change. A two-stage picture. So the first stage is we alleviate some basic economic insecurity. So people feel some sort of security. Then they can start to think about genetically modifying their tissue to make it maybe more resilient to the heat. I don't know, in certain climates that could be very useful down the line. I think if you have people, they need that kind of thing is quite complex for people, and they need to have a very secure mind frame in order to think about that in a reasonable way without getting panicky and thinking it's like the Terminator or something, if they're gonna, two-stage picture of, I think first some basic social reforms, so like a basic income, recognizing forms of work that are not recognized, having a new commons sort of revived, and then could talk about more radical social struggles, such as maybe having a direct democracy, where like a face-to-face situation where you make decisions face-to-face, as in the ideas of Murray Bookchin, who's a famous libertarian socialist. He writes about this idea of communalism, where people make decisions face-to-face. They're not just electing people to make policy for them, they're making policy, and then they elect other people to carry that policy out. That could happen down the line, but right now it takes time, I think.
I think the question's entirely right. The coming displacement of nearly all jobs is a very big thing indeed, and people are right to be put in a stage of shock about it. It is undoubtedly going to be a good thing if we make this transition work fine, but it's not going to be easy to make it there. First of all, we have to work out the economics of an interim universal basic income, and as this earlier question pointed out, there are all kinds of questions that pop up. Well, isn't it going to be inflationary, and there's a long list of difficulties. I'm not saying these difficulties are insurmountable, but they're going to take a lot of solving, but in principle we can get there. But there's also also the whole cultural aspects. You know, we have all grown up in an environment, not just of consumers saying you must spend, 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 but there's a Protestant work ethic which basically says, you know, if you're not working, you're a second-class citizen. And this is deeply in our society. And maybe it wasn't a bad thing to have most of society, you know, it encouraged people to play their part. But now we've got to undo that. So these things aren't going to be easy to change. And in my professional life, when I talk as a futurist, often to large companies, they often prefer to get the answer, and they've got consultancies who actually do give them the answer, which is, actually, you don't need to worry about this too much, because although some jobs will be displaced, there'll always be lots of new jobs, don't worry, you know. And so the grasping hold of that so they can avoid facing up to the hard economic questions and the hard cultural questions. My answer there is always to point out the reasons why these arguments are fallacious, that actually the forthcoming artificial intelligence is going to be able to do all the jobs, not just the routine jobs. They're going to be increasingly creative, increasingly compassionate, increasingly caring as well. So all jobs, I think, within maybe 20 years will be very much up for a complete change. There may be a very small number of people who are still working, but maybe 99% of people will not be working. And I think this is a very big thing, and we have to make people think about it very hard and very fast. We should not shy away from that. We should not sugarcoat this question. We should say, let's think about it, and we need an answer. And the existing politics, the existing thinking is not sufficient. This is where the viewpoints of something like the TZM is going to suddenly become of critical importance to society.
Before we carry on, I was just going to say I did actually contact a few women to try and speak. So, you know, I did try, but I just had no luck. And it was one of the reasons why I actually created a new email for talk submissions. So hopefully we get a bigger variety of speakers for next year. So I did try.
Yeah, we put up a post on Facebook saying, like, specifically this is a call for female speakers, preferably maybe female and vegan speakers as well, because we want that kind of thing represented here, because that's a big axiom of sustainability. But just one thing before we move on to onto more questions. In reference to, you know, how I would feel about not being able to go to a job, is I'm reminded of a thing that Aaron Ra said when he said, my job gets in the way of my work. And, you know, I personally, I mean, I can speak for myself, I don't know about the rest of you, but my real purpose in life cannot be pigeonholed into something that is done for money. Because, as Ben McLeish says, if you're doing it for the money, it's probably not worth doing to begin with.
I had a question just following Adam's talk about activation energy. What is kind of sort of preventing us from taking that first step towards a resource-based economy? Is it kind of waiting for the rest of the world to sort of agree to it, or could we kind of just go on board with it, just with the people that are already advocating it in the UK, for example? Could we come together and make that first step towards starting a city?
Yeah, I mean, building on what I referred to in my talk, there's a huge amount of influence when it comes to what people are doing. Like I said, for example, if one person is doing something and no one else is, then they look around and see other people not doing it. So there's this sort of tendency in our social psychology to think that because you're doing something different, that means it's not allowed, it's not permitted, because no one else is doing it. So there is that tendency to think, oh no, well, no one else is doing it, so why should I? So there is that understandable tendency, and that is what makes that initial push so difficult, because, I mean, it's a bit like, say for example, if you're one person trying to push start a Jeep, for example, you're going to have a far harder time of jump-starting that than if 10 people were doing it. And that's why the Zeitgeist Movement is in a preliminary stage of raising awareness, building up like core groups of people to actually build up, and so we will have eventually enough people to actually create that critical mass and create that tipping point. Because there was, I think it was a study called Consensus, built through the committed actions of minorities, where they found that the tipping point of a percentage of people in a certain society that had a certain idea, where it suddenly became dominant throughout the society, was only 10%. Just 10%.
Do you reckon there is enough sort of critical mass based on the amount of people already advocating the resource benefit?
For the Zeitgeist movement, or in terms of the Venus projects or resource-based economy, not yet. We have to build that up, and that is why this seems so frustrating and difficult right now, because we're having to push against that initially. So that's why we hold events like this and actually encourage other people to come along. That's why we want all those DVDs and all those leaflets gone, because even if it's not just for yourself, even to keep a few that you can drop in gift to other people, and drop in doctors' waiting surgeries. I drop them all the time in any place where there are flyers. I always carry flyers on me so I can drop some down. Even because with my job, I sometimes stop in motorway service stations, and in the men's toilets above every single urinal is a framed advertisement, and I always leave a flyer tucked in the corner of those frames. Right? That is why we need as many people as possible with that activation energy, as I called it, to build that critical mass.
Hello, you're right there. I know that the Zeitgeist Movement isn't a political party, but I honestly think that having sort of a political wing of the Zeitgeist Movement would sort of give the idea of a democratic sort of situation of the Zeitgeist Movement.
At least it gives a lot of visibility, because people do pay attention to elections. There was a movement member in New Zealand, if I remember correctly, who actually independently applied, and he got in all the leaflets that were given to everybody in New Zealand, basically advocating TZM. So it's a good way to get the message across, even though he may not believe in the political system, or that he could actually bring forth any change with
that. Can it really?
Yeah, and many people in our core group in Finland have actually, they do try also to change the world through the political system, and it's their choice. They do get involved, and the good thing is that at least they get the word out there. They also do the activism we have, and then they do that as well every other year. So. Yeah, I don't see it as something you cannot do, but I wouldn't place much trust on the hypothesis that that's going to bring out relevant change, except for getting the message out there.
In the UK, and I don't know if there are many other countries around the world, but the money-free party is something that's set up specifically for this, to advocate a resource-based economy through the political spectrum. Again, very much like Timo, I'm not sure how far it's going to go, but if it's a platform for which to plant seed, put these ideas out, get them into the public spectrum, why not get behind it?
Anyone can stand in any constituency, right? You just pay your deposit and you can stand, right?
I would vote Labour.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much for a really fascinating and inspiring day. The vision is huge, and the ideas are huge, and the goals are huge, but there's a handful of people here, and that is just depressing. So, education. Now, I'm sure you've heard of the anti-university movement, which started in New York in '67, came to Hackney in '68, and has been revived recently. And it's a way of educating people about subjects that are not taught in school, subjects that are not on the curriculum, from, I don't know, extraordinary, fascinating mathematics to magic to spiritual things to all sorts of things. But it's still on the edges. And you, the Zeitgeist Movement is still on the edges, it's on the fringes, isn't it? And Eric, you must know this as a teacher, surely it needs to get it mainstream into primary school, to children who have that kind of real vision and curiosity and great need to change the world. Start there with kids.
You're preaching to the choir. That's absolutely what we must do, is get out on these children.
So I have a question to build on that. What is the Zeitgeist Movement, and I speak as an outsider and a friend here, what is the Zeitgeist Movement expecting to happen that's going to boost more interest? Is it the new book that's coming out by Peter Joseph, which I believe is going to be published very soon? Is that going to generate more interest, or is there a new film, or is there other activities which is going to get a new surge of interest in what the organisation is doing?
Many hands make the task lighter, so the risk of sounding too much like Jordan Peterson, in kind of his words, to paraphrase him, what does he say? Shoulder responsibility, solve problems. There are many just the right size for each individual, and the question of meaning in people's lives instantly vanishes. You have so much, the meaning is abundant to the point that you won't know what to do with it. Now, that's one thing. Yes, absolutely. The new Humans' Right movement is out now, I believe, and Into Reflections, hopefully, is coming soon. That's of course what we want to reach a critical mass, as the gentleman at the back said. And we're slowly working our way towards that, and it is a long process, and I would say that anything, as I alluded to in the Dr. Gabor Mate quote, was anything that people can contribute is very welcome, and it will be a contribution. That's all I can add to that, really. The groundwork is being laid.
Thanks for the question. Well, there were a couple of topics there, but for example, James Phillips here in the UK has started the TCM education program. He has went to schools to talk about sustainability and the possibilities, the positive image of the future that technology can make possible. And the kids really are in tune to it immediately. They know, they think it's logical. And that's one project that you can get involved with. And to the topic of it being disheartening to see so few people here, I think it's a good amount of people here. I mean, we could have a sold-out event, but I don't think there are many organizations or events in the world that every single time get sold out. It's kind of unrealistic, and kind of stochastic. People have other things as well. But don't get discouraged by that. I mean, Peter said in a Q&A from the Australian event from this year that even if there was just 2 people here and just 1 person, they're still doing what is right. And you just have to focus on doing the thing that is right, not focusing so much on what others do. We will get there. I mean, if the topics that the movement advocates are true, if they have actual value for the development of the society or the evolution of our society, and they will come. I mean, good ideas will surface, and people will accept them. And when I speak about these ideas these days, every time people say that there's just amazing ideas and support those goals that we support, it's just there's a lot of people to get to. And all exponential growth starts slowly, painstakingly slowly, but we're getting there, and we just have to keep focusing on the task and not thinking so much what others do, And of course we need good projects, we need global projects, and we need to, whenever there is some momentum, we need to kind of build on it, and any ideas are welcome. And yeah, thanks.
I think if you're interested in the historical background to a lot of movements for freedom and equality, I think the most important revolution I've come across is the Spanish Revolution, and that took years of dedicated work by only a small amount of people. But then it took it took a few trigger events. So it took Franco invading Spain to really get people moving. And maybe when climate change gets to a point where British people are no longer saying, oh, it's nice weather, it's getting hotter and hotter, and they start to feel, oh gosh, it's actually killing like old people and young people now, it's getting bad. Maybe that might trigger that like rapid. It's usually like in a democracy, it usually takes, because you don't really see revolutions in democracies. You don't really see revolutions that often in democracies.
Be reactive, be proactive.
Revolutions typically.
You're saying this next year, you have failed.
Revolutions typically take place in autocratic states.
To get involved as
They don't typically take place in democracies. If you have in a democracy, it takes like a trigger. I think it often takes like a trigger event to really get people going. It can't just, because people aren't repressed enough, basically. We actually have a pretty good life, so we're not going to really jeopardize that, most of us, by rocking the boat most of the time. It takes, you either have to be somewhere in the middle. You can't be too repressed to the point where you're starving. Most people in those countries don't revolt, and you can't be too fat and happy like a lot of in China, which is the case. A lot of people are very comfortable there, and they don't revolt either. It has to be somewhere in between. There has to be a sort of a middle level of discomfort, I think, before people. Yeah. I think maybe we need to answer another question.
I'm visiting from the States, and from where I'm sitting, things are looking pretty autocratic these days. We're moving closer and closer all the time.
That precipitating event could be just around the corner or something. I completely agree with what you said about that. What is it, 8 years now after the formation of the Zeitgeist Movement, 9-10 years after the release of the first film, that at the annual convention there are, 60 odd people in this room, something like that, and significantly fewer than last year, which is something I find even more worrying, is that the numbers are going down. Which I have to say puts even more of because it doesn't mean the problems have gone away, right? Just because fewer people have turned up doesn't mean that the problems have got any better or gone away. So I have to say that just puts even more burden of responsibility on our shoulders when we leave this room to go out there and... Sorry?
Not a burden.
Even greater measure of responsibility on our shoulders. Thank you. No, you're quite right. You're quite right. It shouldn't be seen as a burden. And actually... This has given my personal life a whole new sense of meaning and purpose and direction, which I didn't have before. So for me, it's actually been great. So everyone to their own perspective. But yeah, no, it is. It's, as I say, every single one of us. Another way to look at it, which is slightly more inspiring, is that we're on the ground floor of a global changing movement, right? So we are the pioneers, yeah? And see yourself like that, as a pioneer flowing against the stream. Eventually the stream will turn around and flow with us, but the journey to critical mass, as you said, is a very, very slow and tortuous one. But when you get there, once you have that critical 10% of active people talking about these things in the population, everybody else follows along very, very, very quickly. So once you do reach that point, things will change very fast.
Just to add something, we did a small questionnaire with the Global Chapters Administration for coordinators, and found out that there's a kind of cycle of active members in all around the world in the Zeitgeist Movement, that it's on average 3 years when we have in a chapter totally new members and the old ones have gone to do other things. And I know personally that all of these old activists still support these ideas. Even, for example, in our ZDay, we had the first coordinator of TCM Finland give a speech. He's now doing Bitcoin work and still had ideas about how we could move into a resource-based economy, and came to give a talk about that. So the movement, even though we're still finding our way to grow, it's an engine that takes in new people and produces deep thinkers into the society. And I think something could bring all of those together. Some event maybe. It doesn't have to go as bad as some people think, but. It's not that even if you don't see like the growth right away, we're still all the time producing new thinkers to the society, and who knows what they are capable of and what they can accomplish.
How about recruiting a celebrity?
Recruiting a celebrity is a good idea. Russell, come here, please. You're watching, we know.
I used to reach out to him every time with my podcast. It takes a critical mass not just to move society, but it also takes a critical mass to actually get the attention of celebrities who you can imagine are being inundated with, oh, have you had a look at this? Have you had a look at this? But it takes enough people by suggesting the same sort of train of thought or idea as, wow, I've had all these people suggesting this, maybe I should have a look into it. That's, again, it takes critical mass. But move on to the next question.
Mine's kind of a question and an idea. On the official TZM YouTube site, you've got a row of videos of where you got podcasts and lectures, and that's about it. I was wondering, is it possible to do another row of videos underneath, of where each video is 5-10 minutes long, and in those videos you have frequently asked questions being asked and answered in those videos?
We have started a project in the Finnish chapter called RBE Education. We're now building, and anyone can come in and be involved. And we are trying to do just that, basically. Take all the material the movement has produced over the 8 years, make concise courses about these issues we deal with, and the solutions we offer, to make it easy for new people to take these courses, which are already made and easy to follow, and you see your progress, what you have seen, what you haven't seen. Maybe it can give you even suggestions on what you could see next, and it will be edited so it's shorter and easier to comprehend, and that way build for the material that we now have scattered all over, and there's huge amounts of it, but we are building a platform for learning. That's something you can get involved with.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just talking about just the YouTube channel, because a lot of people go back to there. They always go back there to see the latest updates and stuff. So, because the official site is very empty underneath, maybe you should put frequently asked question videos there, because a lot of people do refer back to the official YouTube site. Maybe because a lot of people they haven't got time to research or anything, they just want to find out the latest video that's uploaded on there and just listen to that for a while, and that's it. But maybe doing 5-minute videos on there, okay, of common questions that people have in their minds. Something like that. It's so easy just to click onto it, because it's 5 minutes long. I can do this. I can listen to this. It's so easy to do. I think it would be a great idea.
Yeah, one question at a time.
Yeah. Common questions. Do 5-minute videos, but it's there. It's instant. You can go straight onto it.
Yep. There's actually one of the last meetings that we had in London. There was the suggestion made by David that where there was a list of 10 questions that kind of most frequently asked, and yeah, I would like to get involved in doing something like that, definitely. What I would suggest is, if anybody else would like to contribute to helping towards doing that, please do get in contact. I speak for myself, obviously, but if anyone wants to help us out with that, I'm all ears.
Well, we've only got 2 minutes left. Do you want to say any last words?
So I'll suggest some last words, and I find this discussion very interesting indeed, very useful. I'll suggest some heresy to see what their response is. When businesses have got a great plan and they go for it, and it's not successful and it's delayed, and their hope for exponential takeoff keeps going slow and maybe even downhill, there's kind of 3 approaches they can take. One is they give up and they don't bother. Another is they say, hey, we just need to work harder, keep going. But the other way is that do what's called a pivot. A pivot is when you think, well, right, clearly we haven't got this completely right yet. Let's go back to our strategy. Let's figure out which of the things that we're offering are still very relevant, and which of the things which we previously thought were key to our offering maybe should be deprioritized. And many successful businesses have gone through a pivot. Now, I don't know whether the TZM needs to consider a pivot. There may be some things that were very important to the organisation historically, which maybe now need to take a back seat in light of new circumstances. So, and there are new circumstances. I think the phenomenon of Trump, the phenomenon of Brexit brings new things to the table, and maybe the responses to emphasise in that world are maybe not the same responses which were highlighted previously. So that's just a thought. Maybe the right answer is keep on doing it more intelligently and more smarter than before, but maybe there needs to be a rethinking of the strategy.
Definitely. societies are emergent, and this is a evolving, emergent movement. It is open to change. After all, that's what we're advocating. So the movement itself is, it is open to change. So it's not one fixed thing. It's we should remain open.
Critical mass requires numbers.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the problem with any activism, particularly in its early stages, and I think that can still be said of this movement, and is that it becomes quite fractured, you know. There's the Zeitgeist Movement, there's the Venus Project, there's United Earth, there's loads and loads and loads of, loads of groups who basically, on the same page, but they're doing their own thing, they've got their own agendas, they've got their own priorities, and they don't necessarily match with each other. So, when you're in a group like this is but one of many little activist type things there are around the place. I mean, what I would like to see is what I would like to encourage is figuring. Not that I have an answer to this. I'm just putting it out there as something that would be good if it could happen. Not that I see a how for it, but if we could find some ways of getting these groups to connect up with each other, the memberships communicating. I mean, there's a certain amount of crossover, particularly between the Zeitgeist Movement and the Venus Project. There's a certain amount of overlap between these things, but there's also a good deal of fractiousness and almost competition between them, which seems somewhat silly, seeing as this competitive nature is one of the very, very things we're seeking to overcome, right?
Yeah, you want to... should we go 1, 2? Yeah, you can say something.
I'd just like to say something to what David just said. I think too much is made of critical thinking in this movement and not enough maybe of creative thinking. So if anything's going to take a back seat, maybe critical thinking needs to take a back seat, and maybe we need to start entertaining new ideas, to start, rejuvenating possibilities. Just as a last word, I'll just plug my meetup group. I'll say Precarious Workers Movement, Great London, United Kingdom. Anybody who wants to set up their own smaller group, like meetup group, they can help. I can help them. It's very small right now. We're just having sort of weekly assemblies at Speaker's Corner, and I don't even turn up to most of them. Well, I turn up to most of them. I don't turn up to some of them. But I'm usually, like I'll say again, I'm usually at Speaker's Corner. If anybody wants to find me and talk about maybe how all of these different ideas relate, I'm hoping to see if the precarious worker movement does take off, which I hope it does. That maybe it can be some sort of movement around which other movements can coalesce. That may sound quite egocentric to say that, but that's what the old Labour movement used to be. It used to be where the environmentalists and the feminists could come together and talk about issues they had in common. They could come together around the Labour movement. But now, as people like Noam Chomsky have observed, the Labour movement's kind of dying. So maybe this could be some kind of replacement. I hope anybody here is interested in that. It doesn't matter if you're a precarious worker or not. It'd be interesting to hear from you. Thank you.
My final words are that I think my idea for how to go forward is to promote the positive ideas we have, because you can criticize all you want, but if you don't have an alternative, then it's really in vain. You need to talk. I think I came involved because I saw that another world is possible, another future is possible, not the bleak one and the miserable and depressing one I had grown up to believe in. That really stifled my activism. It made me incapable of doing anything. But when I realized that what actually science and technology intelligently utilized for social concern could achieve, and I saw what the Venus Project had to offer, for example, that really inspired me. And that's I think we need to focus on the positive, focus on the solutions, and inspire people. I think they really need being inspired. And this is the transition. The very fact that we are here, all of us right now, this is part of the society changing. There's new ideas surfacing. It has to start somewhere, and this is part of the social change and the transition into something more sustainable. And this is reflected on the UN Sustainability Development Goals as well. They are completely in line with the movement. I would even say that if the UN wants to achieve its goals, it needs to look into the resource-based economy model. So it is really a need, and I think we can make this happen. Thanks.
Okay, so final words. Thank you to every single one of you. The fact that you're here, sat in these chairs, shows that you are a human being who cares about not only your own sustainability, but possibly the sustainability of future generations. You recognise that even maybe in some part of your mind, that you will never personally see the full fruition of what you advocate, but you advocate it nevertheless. I mean, there's a line in Schemata Theory's song A Complex Slate where he says, plant the seed for the tree you'll never get to see. And the thing is, even though that seems like something that's completely self-defeating from like a self-preservation standpoint, to me it's the highest calling that a human being can actually make. So for those of you who are listening to this, for those of you watching later on in the future, thank you for taking the time to actually bother to care, because that humanity, that is what is going to move us forward. And even if you're not maybe going to necessarily advocate for any particular technological innovation or anything, just be a human being. Radiate that kind of value system that you want for the future. Internalize that and then radiate it out, because that will at least do some of the work for helping moving us forward. So we all want to be Zeitgeist moving forward. But so yeah, we're having sort of like an after party sort of thing at the Marlborough. Is that the Marlborough Arms? Yeah. So for that, because I appreciate that some of you may have questions or further elaborations that you'd like to share with us. But by all means, find us there. We'll be drinking there all night. So thank you very much for coming along. Thank you. Oh, and thank you to Dan. Thank you to David Dan as well. He actually put up all the money for this event. He's really the moving force behind this. So thank you, Dan. Right, let's go to the pub.